Okay, so once again, welcome to my presentation on adventures in applied aquatic sciences, where I will be presenting on how it is that one can apply what you've learned in academia, what you learn at Santa Ana College, and if you're transferring to a four-year university, what you would learn there, how you would apply all of that knowledge to the real world. And so just to reiterate what I said before I started the recording, I am a professor in biology at Santa Ana College, where my full-time job is to teach. But I also have an active career in science where I'm still doing research and publishing papers. And I also own and operate my own environmental consulting company. That's what you see down here in the lower left. That's Marine Consulting LLC. So let me start off with a quick outline so that you know exactly what it is we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to give you a little introduction about me, and I'm hoping that it'll be encouraging to many of you. I know that many of you have questions about your future, and maybe you have a little bit of concern and anxiety about what to expect. Maybe you don't feel that you're the best student in the world. Well, guess what? Neither was I. So there's hope for you, because obviously there was hope for me. So I'll give you a brief introduction on that. I'll talk about my meandering pathways. I actually came to teaching at Santa Ana College in a very non-linear way. So this is exactly where I need to be. And if I had tried to get here from the beginning, I don't know if I would have made it here. I think that it required this circuitous route for me to realize what I'm best at and how to best help my community and my students. So I'll talk about some of the academic career choices that I made, including some of the mistakes that I made, so that I can bring some real world feeling to this. And I will then talk about my happiness in multitasking, both my job at Santa Ana College and also my work with my company, Marine Consulting. And then I will end with some concluding remarks. But the whole point here is to demonstrate what it is that you can do with experience in aquatic sciences in particular, but it's not exclusively that. If you have interests in mountains or desert communities or whatever it is, chemistry, geology, there is a place for you in applied sciences. So just to kind of emphasize what that means, applied sciences is where you take what you learn and you actually apply it to real world situations. And there are far more opportunities out there than you might be aware of, and actually than most university professors are aware of as well. So this will probably give you guys some hope, perhaps, for career paths in the future. I know that some of you out there are really excited about being marine biologists. Well, I actually didn't know that I wanted to be a marine biologist until much further into the process. I was fairly certain that marine biology was this romantic thing that people did where they hugged whales and they pet dolphins and they did stuff like that, and they, swam with sharks. Well, sometimes you can do that, but most of the time, marine biology is actually hard work. And so this is pretty much what marine biology is like for most people that go out on research vessels and boats like I do. I got to say, by the way, this is a stage shot. It's not real. These are actually three very experienced marine biologists a long time ago, back in the 80s. They staged this, I think, with some seltzer water and some crackers, but you get the idea. If you're really into this and you really love spending time out to sea, you get over the seasickness actually quite easily. So for me, it actually started all the way back in the, in the 80s. Okay, so this is long before many of you were born, I know. I actually had a love of the ocean from an early age. This is actually me at the age of, let's see, I think I was 13 on the left and I was 14 on the right. So young kid, I was scuba diving with my dad and at the local islands here in Southern California. So that picture in the lower left there is from San Clemente Island, which is far beyond Catalina. Catalina, that picture on the right, was taken, I think, on my 14th birthday, actually. So super exciting. I found back then that the ocean was the place where I need to be. And there was no doubt about it. I was going to be an ocean person, in spite of the fact that at that early age, I did experience seasickness. So here I am actually trying to get my breakfast down on the boat with a bunch of really experienced divers and not looking all that happy because I don't know if that breakfast actually stayed down in me that day. It probably didn't, but that's okay. It didn't stop me. I went on to learn how to surf and how to free dive, and I did a lot of scuba diving. I used to spearfish, and so that was always a big deal at 14, 15 years of age, be able to come home with some food for my family. Very accomplished feeling. So when I graduated from high school, I ended up at the University of California at Santa Barbara, which happens to be right on the coast. And I certainly enjoyed my time at UC Santa Barbara. It was a fun time. I actually spent my first year living in this little building down here. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but this is it right here, right along the coast. That was the last time that I actually lived so close to the ocean. So now we're all inland because it's really expensive to live that close to the ocean. So enjoy your time here at Santa Ana College. Enjoy your time wherever it is that you transfer away. You're going to be making lots of friends. I certainly made a lot of friends when I was at UC Santa Barbara. So it is at UCSB that I learned that I was actually fairly good at sciences having to do with the ocean in particular, but aquatic sciences in general. So that included freshwater systems as well. But I wasn't great in chemistry. I certainly wasn't great in mathematics. Physics, I was okay in. Biology, I was good in. I actually did fairly well in biology. And so while I didn't know what career path I would be following at this point as an undergraduate at UCSB, I knew that it would have to do with the ocean in some way, shape, or form. And so unlike many of my colleagues who were going through the process of training to be marine biologists, they went to go and get scuba certified when they were in college because it was kind of required of them to learn how to dive. They didn't particularly like diving, and scuba diving is actually kind of difficult. It's challenging, and it takes a lot of energy to be a good scuba diver. And so a lot of them didn't enjoy scuba diving. They did it because it was required to become a marine biologist. I, on the other hand, grew up as a scuba diver long before I got to college. So for me, the scuba diving part was easy. It was a piece of cake. And in fact, in the summers between the actual academic years, I was back and forth to my hometown in Hawaii, where I grew up in Southern California and Hawaii. So I would go and visit my friends and family in Hawaii. And I actually worked as an underwater tour guide. So that was kind of cool. It was easy being a scuba diver. That was something that was simple for me. That's me at a much younger age. It was a lot of fun being an underwater tour guide. However, even though I knew that my career would eventually take me someplace into the ocean for a career, I didn't think that being an underwater tour guide was something I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I decided after getting my bachelor's degree at UC Santa Barbara that I would attempt to continue on in education. And so I found myself at Oregon State University. I tell you, coming from Santa Barbara and from Hawaii and elsewhere in Southern California, as I did, it was a difficult transition to move up to Oregon, where it's much colder, much wetter, and very different from the tropics or from Southern California. But I learned to make the most of it. And ironically, I was up there not to study marine biology, but actually to do something sort of different. I was in an entomology department. Entomology is the study of insects. And so I ended up technically getting my master's degree in entomology, although what I was really doing was developing complicated mathematical formulas. And I'm not even going to explain to you what this all means necessarily, but Yes, that is me back in May of 1997, sporting a mullet. Yes, I actually had a mullet in the 90s. I don't know what I was thinking, but anyway, it was interesting. I was actually creating mathematical models to try and explain evolutionary processes in animals that are parasitic in the way that they live. And so that was very similar to some work that I had done as an undergraduate, where I had actually studied parasites. And so it was a fascinating time for me, because I tell you, you think somebody getting, excuse me, someone getting a master's degree, they must know what they're doing by this time. They must have some direction. I tell you what, I actually didn't. And my whole reason for getting a master's degree was because it bought me 2 more years of not having to worry or not have to think about what I was going to do with my life. So it helped me kind of stave off the inevitable of having to find a job and all of that. Nonetheless, I made the most of it, and it was a lot of fun. Now, I didn't really know what it was that I was going to do with my life after this. I ended up coming back to Southern California after completing my master's degree. And by a really interesting set of circumstances, I ended up connecting with some biologists who turned me on to a new life in biology of applied sciences. Because when I was at Oregon State, none of the professors, frankly, even at UC Santa Barbara, none of the professors could tell me what jobs were awaiting me, because they were only aware of academic jobs. It's like they're professors. So their assumption is all of their students are going to become professors, except that that's not going to happen, right? The vast majority of people are not going to do that. And so they're completely clueless on that. So it was when I got back down to Southern California that I became aware of some of the opportunities for actual working biologists that don't really intend to go into academia or end up at a university. So with my master's degree, I ended up working for a company down in Southern California in Costa Mesa called NMC Aquatic Sciences. That's what they're called now. And you should go and check out their website. Gives you an idea of what a company, an actual private company, does with the science of marine biology, and how it is that they assist clients with their environmental needs. And so I actually worked for this company for, let's see, a little over 9 years. And so it introduced me to an entire new world of opportunities that I didn't know even existed. And it was at this company where I gained my most practical skills. Tell you, there are things that you learn in graduate school, and there are things you don't learn in graduate school. In grad school, they don't teach you how to tie up a boat. They don't teach you how to drive a boat. They don't teach you how to tow a boat. They don't teach you things like this because that's not part of the academic process. And yet, an employer is going to want to know that you know how to operate a boat if you're going into marine biology, because otherwise they have to take the time to teach you that. So I gained a lot of these important skills actually while I was on the job at NBC. And what was really nice is that over that 9-year period, I was able to make new contacts with people in industry. So I met biologists that were working in all kinds of areas that I was completely unaware of prior to beginning my job at NBC. So I didn't realize there are not just, I mean, I had heard of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'd heard of them, but I hadn't heard of like 20 other agencies that also employ biologists. State agencies, so the state of California hires all kinds of biologists for many reasons, from forestry to fisheries management, you name it. Federal agencies also. Local agencies, and I mean like local, like Orange County hires biologists to do very specific things, and that's a county job. There's public utilities, including all of your treatment facilities, your electric companies. Why would an electric company need to hire a biologist? Well, I'm glad you asked. I'm going to show you that in upcoming slides. But there's other places too. Museums. I interacted with museum scientists, with private industry. So there's lots of companies that hire biologists as well. And then, of course, the consulting world. I was working for a consulting company, but there were other consulting companies that we interacted with as well. So I got a better sense of all the various opportunities for scientists that was outside of academia. And it turns out there are more jobs for scientists outside of academia than there are in academia. Nobody told me that when I was actually going through the process. Let me show you some examples of some of the things that we did, and I'll give you an idea of who the clients were, who it was that we were working for in these jobs. So the top two images are actually us doing fish studies, two different kinds of fish studies for some of the coastal generating stations. In this upper left image, we're actually working off of Ventura. That's the Mandalay generating station. They're one of the coastal generating stations that makes electricity for us here in Southern California. So these power plants are right on the coast. They use seawater to essentially cool off their condensers so that they don't melt the power plant. But in so doing, they may end up having some sort of an impact on the environment. In order for them to even operate, a group of marine biologists needs to come in and do an assessment on the impact that these companies might have on the environment. And this is going to determine whether or not their permits get renewed every 5 years. That's really important stuff. The power plants are not allowed to do it themselves. That would be a conflict of interest. It is required that marine biologists, third parties, be hired in to come and do this work. So these two biologists here are actually pulling in a net offshore at a pre-designated location to describe the fish species that are living right offshore of this power plant. These other two biologists here are actually counting the number of fish that were killed actually as a result of another power plant's operation. This is actually a large amount of fish. It isn't normally as bad as what you would see there, but it's important work to get a handle on what the environmental impacts are to some of the industrial operations. In the lower left here, this is actually at Port Hueneme, which is mostly a military facility where a lot of naval ships are. And so we were working with the Navy in this project to understand the chemistry in the sediments in the harbor, because they were planning on bringing bigger ships in the future. And so they would have to deepen the harbor. And if they did that, it meant doing a lot of construction work that might have some environmental implications. So they hired us to come in and actually do that chemistry assessment. So while I am a biologist by training, I also had to do a lot of work in chemistry and also geology, things that I wasn't necessarily trained for, but that I learned on the job. And in the lower right image here, this is actually working with an air quality management district. So in this case, the air quality is super important to monitor that. But as you might expect, the ocean and the air are connected. And so it turns out that when you have polluted air, it ends up transporting a lot of that pollution to the oceans. And so in this lower right image here, we're taking water samples right at the surface in Santa Monica Bay to provide chemistry information to that air quality air management district, so they could kind of see how much of that air quality is making its way, or if it's bad air quality, how much of that is making it into the ocean. So definitely worthwhile stuff. And so these are monitoring efforts, but we also did restoration as well, which was really rewarding. One of our greatest resources in Southern California are our kelp beds. And so the background image here is actually of a kelp bed. I believe this is right off of Palos Verdes. And so these are underwater forests. When you're looking at them on the surface and all you see is the brown kelp floating, that's just like literally looking at the canopy and not even the whole thing. And when you see it dead and washed up on the beach and you think, oh, that's kind of gross. Well, that's only the aftermath. If you actually are underwater looking at this, it is the most beautiful habitat that we have immediately right offshore in Southern California. So it turns out it's really important to have very healthy kelp beds. And so for many years, I was involved in restoration efforts to transplant kelp to try and get it to grow and expand our kelp beds. Why are kelp beds important? Well, if you like to go fishing, then you should care about kelp beds, because it turns out that kelp beds actually enhance the reproductive ability of fishes. Fish love to aggregate around kelp beds. The more kelp there is, the more opportunities there are for fish to reproduce and make more fish. And you should want that if you are a fisherman. So we actually worked with a series of companies down in San Diego, and also with a few cities, including here, this was with the city of Laguna Beach, where we restored 10 acres of eelgrass, 10 acres of kelp right off of their main beach. So it was a lot of fun, a lot of work. And it required us to also understand all of the kelp beds along the Southern California coastline. And so this is where I gained a huge amount of skill sets, stuff that I didn't learn in college. You know, now you can take classes in GIS. You can take classes in graphical computer skills. It was not easy to do that back in my day. You had to kind of acquire these skills as you went along. And so I actually had to learn how to map kelp beds using aerial photographs. And then you digitizing all of that to come up with how much kelp there actually was. Kelp beds are so huge, you can't do it all by scuba diving. You actually have to fly airplanes over the coastline, take pictures of the entire coastline, assemble everything with computer programs, and then determine how much of it there actually is based on what's floating on the surface. And so I had to learn how to manage large data sets. This is a computer skill set that I didn't come in with. I had to basically gain it on the job. I also had to learn a lot about ArcGIS, which is the main program for doing GIS these days, and also graphical design. Again, large data set management, GIS, graphic design. These are not things that you learn in marine biology training. And yet they are essential to understanding the actual biology out there. So I guess the bottom line, the important takeaway from this slide is you have to be multitasked in the workforce. If you're only good at one thing, you know, it makes you less marketable than if you actually come in with multiple skill sets. And so this is a good example of that. Here's a great example. So here's a kelp bed right off of Malibu, actually, where we digitized it, and then you essentially tell the computer to assign areas to pixels. And I don't want to get into too much detail here, but essentially we can determine precisely how much surface area a kelp bed has using this computer technology. And so for this happens to be a place called Nicholas Canyon Kelp Bed. That's this one right here. And it is 0.1946 kilometers squared. Okay, in 2005, that's what it was. So every year we're going back and we are adjusting our numbers so that we can see whether kelp beds are increasing or decreasing. And fisheries managers are very, very eager to get their hands on this kind of information so that they can better manage fisheries for everybody. So this is one of our local power plants. This is Huntington Beach Generating Station. You've probably passed it if you've ever driven on PCH. And again, because these power plants are along the coastline and they're drawing in seawater and pumping out warm seawater, they have to monitor their effect on the environment. So this is the Huntington Beach one. This picture here is actually from the inside of the El Segundo generating station over near LAX. And so seawater is actually drawn in from far offshore here. It flows in through these big conduits, comes into this concrete embayment here. It's actually called a forebay. And then from there, it runs through a series of screens. These are actually screens, these big brown things. And then the water flows beyond that. Here's another picture of it via these pumps in the back. They pump the water in after it's been filtered, and they use that seawater to cool off their condensers, and then they flush it back out into the ocean. Now, it's not like it's full of chemicals or any problem in that respect. The pollution is actually that the water has been warmed. And so warm seawater is being pumped out. And so it has a potential to kind of affect the offshore environment. So these guys have to monitor that effect. And so I was hired for many years to do this work for El Segundo, or for the company that essentially runs the El Segundo generating station. So when they treat the facility, they actually have to keep the equipment running well and free of any fouling organisms like barnacles and mussels and things that might grow on the walls and the equipment. So they actually close off the heated effluent, the stuff that goes offshore. They close that off and they actually recirculate it, and they heat the entire system up to essentially cook the fouling invertebrates. The problem with that is that they also sometimes can acquire fish and other important invertebrates. And so they have to hire us to come in and help determine what it is that was harmed by this process. So here is a basket that's dumping out all of the things that were killed. Now, I got to tell you, this is probably, I'm going to say 3 5-gallon buckets worth of stuff. And some of it we're actually able to return back to the ocean, and it lives. This is a small amount compared to what I've seen in the past. And so this is actually if I saw this amount come out, I'd be very happy that only this amount was affected by this activity. Now, the power plant and other people are coming in. They have no idea what this is. They were trained in how to run a power plant. They weren't trained in understanding marine biology. So when I look at this, I can tell you precisely what each of these species is. I can tell you the ratio of males to females, for example. And I can tell you whether the juveniles or the adults have been affected by this. So these are some local species that are all pretty common. And so we need to monitor, essentially we are hired to monitor the fish offshore. We're also hired to monitor chemistry loads offshore as well, and invertebrates. So this is a different power plant. This is the Scattergood generating station, which also happens to be in El Segundo. It's just down the street from El Segundo power plant. And so here I am actually collecting sediment offshore using these very special stainless steel box cores, and where we wash out the sediment, and we retain all of the organisms in there, bring them back to a laboratory, and we actually assign this to a group of taxonomists. And so taxonomists are biologists who know all of the invertebrates, and they quantify everything. And I'll tell you, it is an incredibly difficult skill set to identify all of the organisms in a sample like this. So if you are obsessive compulsive and you know that about yourself, you would be a really good taxonomist, because you'd probably want to sit down at a microscope, and what you do is you pour out this bag full of invertebrates, and under the microscope you sort everything into piles that make you feel really satisfied. It's like, I've sorted all of the blue M&Ms together and all of the green M&Ms together. Okay, that's kind of what a taxonomist does. But then, of course, they have that skill set of identifying all of the animals in the sample. So we're also taking chemistry samples of the water and of the sediment too, to make sure that everything is okay. Now, I took a detour in the middle of all of this. I actually went back to graduate school and worked a full-time job while I was in a PhD program at UCLA. And so I ended up finishing my doctorate and PhD in biological oceanography. And this is a nice picture here of me back in the day with my PhD advisor. This is Dr. Bill Hamner, who has long since retired from UCLA. But he and I worked on some pretty cool stuff together. So this is really where I learned how to multitask. So in addition to working a full-time job as a consultant and also being a graduate student, and also, by the way, being a husband and a father and having a mortgage and car payments. Okay, so I was a grown-up at this time. I learned how to apply myself to all of these things at one time. And it wasn't easy, but I figured out how to do it. And I continued to work as a marine scientist, where I got to scuba dive. And so this is a nice example of that, where for my PhD work, I actually placed out a whole bunch of current meters in Santa Monica Bay. So this is a current meter. It's actually measuring the instantaneous movement and direction of all of the water below it. And then it transmits all of that information to a hard drive, which is on a buoy floating above it. And then after every 2 hours, a cell phone receiver essentially sends all of that information to a receiving station at Pepperdine University in Malibu. And then from Pepperdine, it gets sent over to UCLA to a server. And so I get to sit at my desk and download the data from this unit every 2 hours. So that is essentially, and it's really, this is a very expensive piece of equipment, but I'm fixing it with a Craftsman wrench there. And you'll notice that the Craftsman wrench is around my hand with a lanyard, because the water is 1,200 feet below me. And if you drop your tools, there's no getting it back. And you made all that effort to get out there. The last thing you want is to have to turn around and go home because you lost your single tool. So anyway, I studied zooplankton aggregation, zooplankton, small little animals that float in the open ocean. And I studied where it is that they aggregate, not just small animals. I also studied large animals too, including large jellyfish. So in order to do the large jellyfish work, I actually worked very closely with an organization called the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. This is one of their research vessels. It's called the Point Lobos. They are the research arm of the Monterey Bay Aquarium. So funded by the Packard Foundation of Hewlett and Packard. So that's the connection there. And this is the jelly that we were tracking. This is Chrysora fuscescens. It's a sea nettle. And yeah, it'll sting the bejesus out of you. These things are about 1 meter in diameter. They're huge, and lengthwise 5 or 6 meters long. So, up to 3 feet in width and anywhere between 15 to 20 feet long. These animals are huge, and they eat zooplankton. And by the way, they don't have a brain. So it's kind of a cool thing. In the belly of this ship is a whole series of monitors where a pilot actually drives this remotely operated vehicle in the lower right corner here. This is an ROV, a remotely operated vehicle with a huge camera in the middle and a bunch of collecting equipment. I believe this one was $60 million. So you could have one too if you have that amount of money. I don't have that amount of money, but it was really fun to drive their ROV. But we did take some pretty cool video. And so this is an example of some of the video where we're looking at jellyfish aggregations in the open ocean. And you'll notice that these jellyfish are basically swimming in the same direction, more or less. So there's one that was swimming to the left. There's another one swimming to the left, swimming to the left, swimming to the left. And there's one coming up who was not behaving properly, but everybody else is swimming to the left. So why is that important? Well, because in the open ocean, we determined that these swimming jellies were actually swimming towards a source. And we did these video transects all over this place here in Monterey Bay. And it turns out that there is a line out there in the sea where there's super warm water on the north side and super cold water on the south. And it's all coming together, and food aggregates there. So what is the big deal here? We found that these jellies were actually, no matter where they were in Santa Monica Bay, in Monterey Bay, they were swimming towards this line in the middle of the sea. That's really not bad for an animal with no brain. So we were able to demonstrate that these animals do exhibit some pretty interesting behavior out there, even though they may not necessarily have an intelligence like us. And so it was when I was at UCLA that I also learned that I really enjoyed teaching. This is me, a younger version of me, giving some instruction in population growth analysis. So this is a biology topic that is very math heavy. And so I'm basically trying my best to explain the math to a group of biologists who may not necessarily think of math as their best skill. So it was really fun. I basically grew as a scientist. And so when I finished my PhD, I ended up moving to a much larger environmental consulting company. Instead of working for a local company, I began working for a much bigger company, Weston Solutions, down in Carlsbad, where I was the director of marine science services. And, I got to manage a bunch of really cool projects, including, and some of my clients included local entities like the city of Newport Beach was one of my clients. The Port of San Diego was a client of mine, but also national and international clients as well. We did a lot of work in Puerto Rico. We did work in Guam. We had to travel to all of these locations. That was really exciting stuff. So here I am actually with one of my close colleagues. And yes, that is an underwater metal detector. So we were detecting devices underwater so that we could retrieve them. And so this really took me to all kinds of really cool places, including the city of Chula Vista. Okay, that's not really one of the coolest places necessarily, but one of the projects that we were doing was stormwater monitoring for the city, where they were really concerned about stormwater that was running off their city, going into these storm drains and then flowing out into the ocean. They were concerned about chemicals being transmitted from their surface streets out into the ocean. So we were helping with that chemistry analysis. So here I am at 3:42 a.m. collecting water as it's flowing into the storm drains here. And I had a crew on a boat offshore, and they were collecting water offshore at the exact same time so that we could make comparisons. So that was really exciting and fun. And, a couple of other really fun clients. This is the city of Dana Point, who operates the Dana Point Harbor, where we were helping them come up with a monitoring plan. This is actually the RHMP, the Regional Harbor Monitoring Program that we designed for them. So we essentially took this entire harbor, turned it into polygons, and then from there began to do a bunch of chemistry analysis to help them understand where their hotspots were. And it turns out that their hotspots were everywhere that there was a storm drain. So it's where stuff was flowing into the ocean from the land. And very recently now, our emphasis in marine biology is in understanding how the land influences our coastal ecosystem. And it turns out that anywhere where you have people and cities and freeways and development, that is going to lead to runoff that is going to potentially cause problems in the open ocean. So we helped the city of Dana Point come up with something called a best management plan to deal with the chemicals that were flowing into their harbor. Things are way cleaner now than they were back when this study first began. And, like I said, this job took me to all kinds of interesting places all over the country. And locally here in Southern California, but also on the West Coast and the East Coast, and even into Hawaii, where we did some work for the Pearl Harbor area. Anyway, there's lots of jobs out there though that are not in academia. Now you don't have to visit this. I put this here, if you want to visit this website later, you can. I checked it last night and I guess this morning. And as of this morning, there are 6,599 federal jobs for biologists, and about 10 of them are marine related. Ironically, for reasons I don't understand, because it's always shifting, it depends on where the financial resources are coming from. But about 80% of these jobs right now are forestry related. So if you are into the mountains and studying the biology of forests, there's a lot of jobs right now for some reason. And so I urge you to check it out. But there's all kinds of really happy and successful scientists who are not in academia. They're working for a federal agency like this. This is Kevin Lafferty, works for the U.S. Geological Survey. Larry Thompson, another really well-known biologist, works for NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And then here's Ora Dixon, who's an incredibly a skilled marine biologist working for the U.S. Fisheries and Fish and Wildlife Service. These are just 3 agencies. There's a whole bunch of them out there to choose from. And what's more is that there are other opportunities. So this here is a close friend of mine, Kim Anthony, who worked for Southern California Edison for a long time. Again, a power plant. This is a power making company. And yet, Southern California Edison hires marine biologists like Kim. She is actually one of their very senior most marine biologists. She just only recently left them for an even bigger job, but she got her bachelor's and master's degree from Cal State Long Beach. This is a very important person for you to know about. This is Dr. Jeff Armstrong. He actually is a SAC alumni, and he's a member of the Hall of Fame and also the SAC Foundation. And he ended up getting his bachelor's and master's degree at Cal State Long Beach and then getting his PhD after that. But he is the head of the environmental division at the Orange County Sanitation District. So he's in charge when you flush the toilet. When you flushed the toilet this morning, he is the person who received all of that from you. And I'm sure if he were here giving this presentation, he'd thank you for that. Anyway, it's really an important job. And so all of the sanitation districts hire marine biologists as well. This is another close friend of mine, Jane Lee, who has taken her career in biology in a very different direction. She is actually a staff writer. She's a freelance writer right now, but for a very long time, she worked for National Geographic. And so she ended up with her bachelor's from Berkeley, a master's from UCLA, and a second master's in science journalism from UC Santa Cruz. UC Santa Cruz is actually one of the few places in the country that has a degree in science journalism. We need more of those, right? We need people who in journalism who can report the science properly. She's one of the few that can actually do that. And so just a couple of opportunities that I have provided for SAC students in the past. I'm going to kind of jump through some of these. So this is kind of a combination of work that I do now with my company, Marine Consulting LLC. And students who do well in my class, I often bring them on for projects. And so I figure I would feature a couple of people here. This is Gonzalo on the left and Erwin on the right. And in the middle, another former student of mine. This is Victor Pham. And these three guys actually helped me with a number of eelgrass transplant projects in this Newport Harbor. All three of these guys went on to do amazing things. And one in particular, Victor Pham, this is Victor in the middle, in August of 2020, just a few months ago, Victor completed his PhD at UC Irvine. So he represents one of my first former students to get his PhD. So yes, it is possible. Victor lives literally 2 blocks away from Santa Ana College. So if he can do it, you guys can do it too. And so really fun. They got to really get their hands muddy, literally, transplanting this grass, which is federally protected. And we were outplanting it to try and improve the conditions for fish in the area. We were essentially creating habitat by this mitigation project. Here's another one, restoring eelgrass in Huntington Harbor. This one was a little more recent, 2016, where we actually had scientists from all over the place, including Santa Ana College. I think at one point I had 19 students from SAC. They were actually earning extra credit like you are right now, but they were in the field actually getting their hands dirty, preparing eelgrass for scientific divers to place out in Huntington Harbor. This here is my colleague, Mike Angara, who's the diving safety officer at UCLA and San Diego State. And so he was running lines for me so that we could actually map out this area. This is what it looks like at low tide. All of the blanked out muddy area is where we transplanted eelgrass. And so here are a bunch of our students. All of these students have gone on to do some incredibly interesting things. This actually is Jessica Gallardo, who is at UC Santa Cruz right now in biology. She's actually going into forestry studies, although she's an environmental scientist. And all of these students have gone on to do amazing things, though. They would bundle the eelgrass for me, and then they would prepare it, and then we would outplant it. Again, all of these students, again, as I mentioned, they've all gone on to do great things. This student on the right is now managing the Desert Center for Cal State Fullerton. And the one in the middle here, this is Erin Johnston. She's an incredibly gifted student. She is currently finishing her master's degree at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in fisheries biology. And she is also one of the foremen that I hire all the time for a lot of my jobs because she's just that good. So again, this is what it looks like to have all of the eelgrass prepared. And this student is bringing it out to the water where the divers then take it out. And these are PhD students. These two guys are PhD students at UCLA. Here's the diving safety officer from UC Santa Barbara, who also came out to help us with this job. And we outplanted them. So we have a PVC pipe that kind of helps guide us. We want to put all of these plugs 1 meter apart. And so this helps us keep everything spaced out properly. This is kind of what it looks like. This is Mike actually planting one of our units. And then as the tide kind of drops a little bit, you can see the spacing of all of these eelgrass plugs. And immediately, having all of this three-dimensional structure underwater, it immediately starts attracting animals. So here's a crab that came in because there's now cover for him. He feels safer being by this eelgrass. And here's what it looked like 1 year later in October of 2017. It's all starting to fill in. And we know that this is where we planted stuff because this is a piece of a popsicle stick, which is what we normally anchor them to, just barely sticking out. And obviously it's made of wood, so it'll degrade over time. This is really cool. 2 years later, it's all beginning to fill in now, and all kinds of really cool animals start showing up. These are all encrusting animals. And swimming scallops, which weren't there before, are now coming in. This is what a swimming scallop looks like, really close. And other things start coming in as well, like seahorses. Yes, we actually have the largest species of seahorse here in Southern California, and it's attracted to this eelgrass. This is at year 3 in 2019. Look how well it's filled in. I mean, the entire thing is filled in. And we now have big predators that come into the eelgrass bed, including an octopus. So this is back in 2019. This particular octopus had such a personality to them. They're really incredible animals. They're very smart. Coming out at me. And actually at one point, tried to grab my camera because it was nice and shiny. Fortunately, I have 2 cameras with me. I have a GoPro as well. So this is taken with a GoPro camera of my actual camera underwater. And, you know, they're really smart, although they don't have really good spatial awareness. So even though he could fit into a small hole, he really tried to get my camera to fit into a small hole too, and it just wouldn't. Anyway, this project has continued on. This is what the eelgrass bed looked like in October of 2020, so just a few months ago. It's really doing well, and we're going to be back in October of 2021 to do our 5th and final year of monitoring for this incredibly successful program. So this is just one of the maps of the area, showing the eelgrass as it is filled in. The yellow is where it is now. And in the purple area here is where we kind of hope it will fill in by that last year. So super excited about this project. I just want to share one last one with you because we don't have a whole lot of time here. I'm also working with a number of water districts with invasive species. And so this also requires scuba diving and freshwater knowledge. So we're working with a district called the United Water Conservation District. They actually provide water to Ventura, the city of Oxnard, and all of that. And so let me just show you some of the work we've done. Again, a couple of former SAC students. Here's Erin again. But this is Brittany Rodemer. Brittany actually was one of my students from 2017. She is now finished up at Cal State Fullerton and is applying to graduate schools as well. A couple of really good divers that we work with. This is actually my daughter, who is in marine biology as well as an undergraduate student. This is one of our divers. This is Brooke Bass, who is an underwater archaeologist. This is another field of science which is little known to many people in academia. Here's our crew on our boat, all assisting in this project of removing invasive mussels from all of the infrastructure from this lake. This is Lake Piru in Ventura. And we've been working with the folks at United Water since 2014 when they first saw invasive mussels. And it includes us putting oceanographic equipment. Even though this is a lake, we actually put oceanographic equipment out in the lake to help monitor the lake conditions to see whether or not the conditions are good or bad for this invasive mussel species. So this kind of ends my presentation. I just wanted to note again that it is the connections that I made in academia that ultimately improved my my standing as a consultant. From there, I made more connections in consulting, which continued to improve my standing in academia, and vice versa. So these are people from all over the state of California that I work with on these projects, including UCLA, UC Santa Cruz, UC Santa Barbara, San Diego State, UC Santa Barbara, and then these two guys are enforcement agents with the United Water Conservation District. And so, of course, we have a lot of fun too when we're out there. It's really a blast. One other guy here. This guy is actually doing a master's degree in underwater archaeology from San Diego State. So again, make friends wherever it is that you end up. You never know what those friendships are going to lead to in the future. If you want to know more about the classes that I teach at SAC and you want to get involved more in marine sciences, I do urge you to go to my website. And I can put that actually in the comments a little later, but this is it right here. You can learn about the courses that I teach. I do urge you all to enroll in marine biology. That's biology 111, 111. That course is taught in the fall, where you could learn even more about these and many other projects that I work on all the time with my former students. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. I went a little longer than I had anticipated, but we have about 6 minutes, and I don't mind sticking around for a few minutes after that to answer any questions. Does anybody have any comments or questions? I see that we have some stuff in the chat. Jeff, did you want to facilitate that in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, there were only 2 questions really in the chat. The first one I think had to do with when you were talking about the power plant, and it was about from Alfredo asking how long the assessments usually take to do, what the timeline is for them.
So the monitoring efforts for the power plants are annual. They have to occur on an annual basis. That report that we put out, some of those data sets that we collect are once a year, others are twice a year, and still others, the chemistry analysis, we have to collect it 4 times a year, which means for one power plant, we are out in the field probably a total of 12 days. And there are 8 power plants that we were working with. So you could very well be out there for about 50 days or so of field work. That's a lot of time spent out in the ocean, right? And actually doing the work. The rest of the time, we're back in the office writing reports. So that's the reality of that situation. Yeah, other questions?
And then the other question was from Maria, how many years of education in total did you do?
I personally did 4 years for my bachelor's degree. 1 year I remained afterwards and worked as a technician. So I wasn't actually earning a degree there. It took me 2 years to get a master's, but most people take about 3 in the life sciences. It took me 5.5 additional years to get my PhD. Took me a little longer because I was also working a full-time job and doing other things. So in total, it ended up being 11.5 years of actual college instruction. That may sound like a lot of time, and you might be going, oh my gosh. It didn't feel like it, because during that time I was doing work that I wanted to do. It was very different from the 4 years as an undergrad where you're actually taking classes. I took some classes in grad school, but it was really all about doing the research that I wanted to do. Now, as far as employment goes, you don't need a PhD for all of those jobs that I mentioned. In fact, many of them, the tech level jobs, you can do with a bachelor's degree. And so if you want to get an idea, you should go to NBC's website. It's NBC Aquatic Sciences. If you look up NBC Aquatic Sciences, NBC Aquatic Sciences, look up their website. Oftentimes they are looking for new technicians. people who are going to complete their college degree or who have already completed their college degree. They hire people at all different levels. So a bachelor's degree is a good place to start to get these jobs. A master's really helps. You don't need a PhD, but if you do, there are obviously positions available there as well. Any other questions?
So you did kind of address the question from Nguyen, who just asked about how many private jobs for marine biologists and not federal jobs there are. I mean, if you want to expand on that.
Sure. So there's maybe a dozen agencies out there in the state, and probably a dozen more agencies federal that would employ biologists, and they hire hundreds of biologists. But there are many small and medium and large size environmental consulting companies out there that hire thousands of scientists. And these are people in all different fields. So when I worked for Weston Solutions, I had biologists that I interacted with that were microbiologists. There were people that were water chemists. There were engineers. And so you kind of form a team. I was the guy who had the marine biology expertise, so I came onto the team with that. But my expertise extended only to a certain point. After that, my colleagues would take over and we formed a really great team. So yeah, the ratio is probably 10 to 1, the number of jobs in private industry relative to federal agencies, or I should say government agencies.
All right, and we're coming up here at 1 o'clock. So how many more questions do you have time for?
I can certainly stick around for an additional 5 minutes if that's okay for everybody.
Yeah, so the next question was, how did you deal with all of the stress?
Okay, that is a good question. As I mentioned before, I wasn't the best student in college. I was okay. I was a good student, but I wasn't, the brainiac student that you turn to for all of the study tips, right? I tried to balance things as best I could, and balancing things really meant having a life outside of science. I really enjoyed scuba diving for fun in addition to work. I love hiking. I love camping, hanging out with my family. I had to find ways to de-stress. Also keeping things into perspective too. I didn't succeed in everything that I did in life, and yet I'm very happy with where I'm at. There are 1,000 ways to skin a cat. There's many ways to lead to success. There's not just one way, and you're going to run into hurdles along the way. Don't let those hurdles stop you. You may get redirected. You may have to think of other options, but there are many ways to happiness and success. So take everything in stride. Don't be too serious about yourself. Be serious, but don't be overly serious. And find a hobby. Find something to do outside of it as well.
Those are some great tips. Thank you. The next question, also related kind of back to your education. What were the classes you took for your master's? Were they more applied science classes or upper division classes?
Okay. In graduate school, depending on the programs that you end up in, the approach to courses is different. Instead of saying, you got to take 2 classes in this category, 3 classes in this category, they have to add up to this number of units. It doesn't work that way in grad school. Once you get into grad school, again, it's different from school to school. When I was at Oregon State University, they required all of their graduate students to take a year of statistics. I know you're like, statistics, that biology? Believe it or not, it's an incredibly important skill to have as a research scientist. You have to understand statistics. So I took 3 quarters my first year of statistics. It sounds overwhelming, and it felt like that a couple of times, but I am so grateful now for having done that. Beyond that, there are other graduate level courses that they require you to take, but they're not again, they're usually in your field. They're usually in the thing that you are really enjoying. And so you look forward to reading those papers and discussing them with your colleagues. The only, and the only time you would be required to take an undergraduate course is if your advisor felt that you were deficient in anything. In my case, when I was at UCLA doing my PhD, I came in with a really strong biology background, but I didn't know oceanography, like upper level oceanography. So my advisor recommended that I take an upper division oceanography class. And it kicked my butt. It really did, because I was not a physical science person. I was a biologist. But I also feel like a much more well-rounded person with some expertise in oceanography now too. So that's the difference. Is there are sometimes there are required courses. Other times it's really just on the recommendation of your advisor.
Very good. All right. What is the number one threat for kelp beds?
The number one threat for kelp beds is temperature rise, actually. So kelp along our coastline does really well when temperatures are cool. Like they love really cool water. Cold water is even better. When the waters are warm, that is not good for kelp. So when in the summer times, normally our water approaches 68, 69 degrees. 70 degrees is getting a little warm. 72 degrees, now you're really warm. There were times, though, in the recent past when our water was approaching 73, 74 degrees. Is this related to climate change? Yeah, it probably is. It's a combination of local things that are going on and also global things. So climate change is not a good thing for kelp beds in the future, unfortunately.
Okay, and then the final question in the chat revolves around if you have any tips managing work, going to school full time, and then is it best to find a job within the field you're going into? I think that's relating back to while you're in school.
Yeah, in my case, I did things out of order to some degree. I got a full-time job and then went back for a PhD afterwards. My recommendation for students nowadays is to take advantage of internships when you can. Paid internships are even better, but they don't always have to be. Even just any internship is going to be super helpful. I know, for example, that our local agencies, whether it's the city of Newport Beach, the city of Santa Ana, or the Orange County Sanitation District, they will oftentimes have paid internships. And when they announce those, you should take advantage of them, especially if you are trying to get into environmental sciences or biology or marine biology. Orange County Sanitation District, if you complete one of their internships, you are in a really good position. Should a position open up at OCSD, you already have a leg up in getting that job. And there is no better job than a government job like what you would have at Orange County Sanitation District. Benefits are incredible. It's a 9-to-5 job. You get paid really well. And that's just one entity, one agency. There's many of them out there. So, if you leave academia, though, and you're like, look, I'm planning to go to grad school, but I'm going to take a break. If you take that break, make sure that you are doing something related to what you want to do in the future. Otherwise, it will be 100 times harder to go back to it. In the times where I took breaks, I was actually working as a marine biology technician, or I was working as an environmental consultant. I was doing something in the field. If you finish your bachelor's degree and then you're like, I need to take a year off. I'm going to go into biology, but I need to take a year off. And then you spend that year working as a bartender, especially when you start making tips and the money starts coming in, it's going to be that much harder to get back into biology. So if you genuinely feel like you're going to take a year off, in that year, approach a company like NMC Aquatic Sciences. Try and get an entry-level technician job where you're actually earning an income and doing things and gaining skills that will relate to your future as a scientist. That way, when you apply to graduate school, you will do so with a renewed vigor in doing it. That's actually what I suggest.
I think those are great suggestions. Make sure that it's related to the field. If you are taking that break, I think that's something a lot of students don't think about when they do take breaks. So thanks for sharing that. There are a couple of more questions that have been popping up in the chat. I do have to leave for another meeting. Are you willing to stick around and answer those questions?
Yeah, actually, I can stick around for maybe 1 or 2 more minutes. And so let's see. Where was that
question from Jamie, and then the question from Nguyen that are at the bottom of the chat.
Okay.
So,
okay. It says there that I had recommended some books to read. Let's see. One about being surrounded by nature improves our well-being. Yeah, there's a number of those books. And by the way, let me first start by thanking Jeff. Thank you very much for moderating. I really appreciate that. That was very helpful. Yeah. So let me get to that question then. Reading books. There's a number of books out there and every year somebody is publishing some new feel-good book about the environment. And I'm thinking about just the writings of John Muir, even. I'm thinking about my favorite scientists. I'm thinking about actually that book that got turned into a movie, Wild. Are you familiar with that? If you can pick up the book Wild, I think that you would really enjoy it. It really speaks to me and probably would speak to you too, especially if you have challenges in life that you have had to deal with. And had to overcome, and yet stay focused on the task at hand of becoming a biologist later on in life. I think that you would be inspired by that.
Is it by John Muir?
No, actually, Wild. Let's see. I'd have to look that one up.
The one that I was referring to, I remember that it had the name Blue. Written by one of your colleagues, I believe.
Yeah, so that book was actually written by Dr. Jay Nichols. Jay is a research scientist with the Cal Academy of Sciences, and he wrote a book called Blue Mind. So yes, I do recommend that. Let me go ahead and maybe put that into the chat here, Blue Mind. And it's Wallace J. Nichols. And I do recommend that. I think that that you would enjoy that. And I see also, so I see, Bao, you mentioned Wild. Yes, that's it. From Lost to Found on the Pacific Crest Trail. Yeah, a lot of fun. I haven't seen the movie, but the book is really good. Okay,
you,
guys.
Professor.
No problem. It's my pleasure. And I'm going to stop the recording now.